So Trent, I really got to talk to you about this album because it might be one of my favorites from this year. Tiger Shaw is a Scranton-based indie rock, pop punk, emo band, and as a side note, between these guys, Modern Baseball, and Title Fight, and a bunch of other bands, when did the land of the Philly cheesesteak become this mecca for great emo music? Anyways, Tiger Shaw have been at the music thing since around 2008 when they released their stellar pop-punk self-titled release, which is still considered a classic amongst the scene, and have been steadily pumping out albums ever since. Now, while this band has solely comprised of Ben Walsh and Brianna Collins since 2014 when most of their band left after their album Charmer, and yes, I know most people who talk about this band have to mention that fact, but it's kind of an obligation at this point. This album shows that the band has become a four-piece with the additions of Colin Gorman on bass and Theodore Teddy Roberts on drums. So as you can tell with this particular release, there has been a lot of hype around it within the band, and they probably had a lot of cool release things planned and tours and shows and everything. But then a certain deadly virus happened and they had to delay their album by a year and just stick with a virtual album performance, which was still very cool, don't get me wrong. It's just unfortunate that they can't really tour off of this album for a long while. But I've gone on and on about the backstory of this particular release, but how is the album as a whole? Yeah, it's pretty fucking great, I'm not gonna lie. Tiger Shaw once again released a stellar collection of indie pop-punk tunes, and I'd be hard-pressed to say that this is probably their most mature release to date. If I had to use a word to describe this album, it will probably be mellow. And I know that's more of a relative term since this is a pop-punk emo release and not like Tiger Shaw is making a bunch of ballads right now. But this album contains a lot more mid-tempo and slower jams while still containing that signature Tiger Shaw energy to them. This is made more apparent with the opening title track, which starts off with a lot more of a campfire-style guitar, with Ben Walsh discussing how he's learning how to not care what other people think of him, and it's more focused on his own self-betterment, which is a consistent theme throughout the album, along with the more nuanced aspects of personal relationships. The track contains a softer first half with more acoustic guitars and very softer sounding harmonies, and then eventually opens up to this big rocky sounding song which sounds super epic, as well as containing some really stellar vocal harmonies from Brianna Collins and a guest vocalist from Andy Hull, who is from Manchester Orchestra. And as a side note, they also released a very good album recently they should check out. This is something that I feel like the band has done well since the very beginning, and that's the vocal harmonies. Now I know there's like kind of this misconception that just because a song has vocal harmonies it automatically makes it better than a song that doesn't. And yeah, that can be true in some cases, but vocal harmonies aren't as powerful if they're not coupled with very good vocal blend or how well the voices sound together. And Tiger Shaw has excellent, perfect vocal blend between Brianna and Ben. And I know this is probably because they've been singing together for over a decade, so they really just know each other's voices at this point, but I feel like that's a point I do have to make. The sounds from their voices really just meld together in a very perfect way that kind of makes them sound like kind of one singular voice without necessarily being one singular voice. It's kind of hard to describe without actually just listening to the songs in the first place. But even then, their individual vocal performances on their songs are still just as good. Ben especially, I feel like, has grown so much as a vocalist since their debut release to now, and I can really see that he's trying to use more of his range from his upper register to his lower register. Brianna too has definitely really solidified herself as a secondary lead vocalist, especially since the album Spin, where she first started doing more lead vocal roles. Now, I will say her vocal lines don't tend to be as interesting as Ben's, but they're still very good and well performed, and I do really like the tone of her voice. I will say though that the big stars of the show are actually the new members Colin and Theodore. Theodore especially has some really stellar drum performances throughout this record that adds a lot of rhythmic edge to these songs. Instrumentally, this album is very groovy for an emo pop punk record. Songs like Hesitation with its more syncopated grooves and jazz chords, or the danceable beat from Commit that honestly reminds me of a late era Paramore song in the best way possible. Again, the tone work on this song really just brings the drums to life and gives the song a lot of energy. The keyboard on this album is also pretty standout as well. Tiger Shaw, mainly in their early years, had a tendency to use a lot of big organ chords in a lot of their songs, and don't get me wrong, I absolutely love that shit, especially when they're used on their more big, hardcore pop punk tunes that really are fast and driving, and just the organ always added a little extra oomph to it and added to their signature sound as a whole. But I do like how in this album they are delving into a lot more different keyboard sounds that really give these tracks a lot more character, especially on songs like Heaven Apart or Commit. A lot of what I can say about this album sonically though can definitely be pinned on their producer, emo god king Will Yip. Now if you haven't heard of Will Yip, you've probably listened to one of his records before, as he's produced for artists such as Citizen, Title Fight, The Menzingers, Turnover, Balance and Composure, The Wonder Years, Panic at the Disco, Circus Survive, La Dispute, Mannequin Pussy, Movements, Me Without You, Touche Amore, and apparently an unreleased album from the rap queen Miss Lauryn Hill. Which, by the way, I need to listen to that Lauryn Hill record like yesterday. But need I say more, the man's a legend, and his production has really made this album sound clean, pristine, but like with a little bit of edge to give it some personality, and I love it. I will say though, my favorite track off this thing has to go to Can't Wait Forever. It's more of an upbeat track that's more reminiscent. I cannot say that word today. It's more reminiscent of early Tiger's Jaw, that is focused on like a lot of big loud drums, those signature organ chords, those kick-ass guitar licks, and also a vocal hook containing the lyrics "I'm wide awake, I can't wait forever," that is just begging to be jammed to in a live setting. And I just realized how much I hate the past couple of years for taking away live shows. Shit. Now this isn't to say that every song off of this album is stellar. Honestly, two of the singles, Cat's Cradle and New Detroit, while fine enough songs, tend to be a little boring for me. Cat's Cradle especially, even though it's a little more upbeat than the other songs, doesn't seem to have a lot of interesting things going on for me personally. But honestly, if your two worst songs on your album is just something I just give a it's alright to, your album's in pretty good shape to me. Quite honestly, this album has so much to like and admire both to previous Tiger Shaw fans and newcomers alike. One thing I feel like the band does better than a lot of other bands, especially some of their contemporaries, is be able to advance their sound enough to sound new and fresh while still containing the elements of their older sound that makes them special to begin with. Like, this record still sounds like an advancement from their previous records while still sounding like a Tiger Shaw record, which I think it's pretty fucking cool. This album has shown a progression in maturity from the band while still being a really good rock record in general. Is it the most complex album in the world? No, while still having a lot of catchy riffs, is mainly just power chords and simple riffs. It's not like Tiger Shaw is known for being the super complex, like tapping solo heavy band. Is it their best album? Can't say right now. I'm definitely very still impartial to Charmer and Spin and even their self-titled record. But I will say after the awful string of the past couple of years we've had, and especially since this year has been a pretty mediocre year for music, if I'm being completely honest, this album definitely hit the right spot at the right time. This album sounds like a $20 bill that you find at the bottom of your couch when you're feeling particularly poor that day. So